Philip Reynolds sat in his office, staring at the latest customer satisfaction reports. Complaints about rude employees, slow service, and unhelpful management kept piling up about one of his electronics stores. He had bought the company 10 years ago, turning it into a successful 14-store chain, but lately something felt off. How do we have this many complaints from one store? Philip muttered, flipping through the reports. We've had some turnover, his district manager, Jeff, said with a shrug. Could just be a bad batch of hires. Then why are there also complaints about overworked staff? If we had a bad batch, we'd be overstaffed, not short. Jeff hesitated. I'll look into it. Philip didn't like that answer. He had built this company from the ground up, but lately he felt too distant from the day-to-day operations. He needed to see what was really going on. I'm going in myself, Philip decided. Jeff raised an eyebrow. You? As what? A trainee, Philip said. I want to see how my employees are treated, how customers are handled, and what the real issues are. A disguise was easy enough. He dyed his salt and pepper hair a darker shade of brown, trimmed his beard down, and wore contact lenses instead of his usual glasses. He dressed in a polo shirt and khakis, blending in with any other new hire. No one at that store had ever met him personally. As a corporate chain, most employees only knew the CEO by name, not face. The next morning, Philip walked into the store under the name Paul. The store manager, Doug, barely glanced at him as he handed him a cheap name tag and a short training manual. Just shadow someone today, Doug said, sounding bored. Don't get in the way. Philip nodded, already getting a bad feeling. He was paired with an employee named Jake, who looked exhausted before the day even started. You knew? Jake asked. Yeah. First day, Philip said. Jake sighed. All right, stick with me. Just don't expect much training. We're understaffed, so you'll probably get thrown in fast. Philip quickly saw the problem. Employees were stretched thin, running between customers and restocking shelves while Doug sat in the back, barely lifting a finger. Customers asked for help, but there weren't enough workers to assist them properly. At one point, a woman needed help finding a laptop, but when Philip offered to check for stock, Doug snapped, We don't have time for that. If it's not on the shelf, tell her we're out. Philip clenched his jaw but did as told, making a mental note. Then, during his break, he heard something that made his stomach turn. He stepped into the break room and froze when he heard quiet sobbing. A young woman sat hunched over the table, her head in her hands. I don't know what to do, she whispered, voice shaking. I can't pay my rent this month. Philip stayed quiet, listening as another employee, a woman with short red hair, sat beside her. They still haven't fixed your paycheck? The young woman shook her head, wiping her eyes. They shorted me again. Doug said it'll be fixed next pay period. But that's what he said last time. Philip felt his hands tighten into fists. You should go to corporate, the red-haired woman said. They won't care, the young woman whispered. Doug said complaining would only make things worse for me. Philip had heard enough. His heart pounded as he realized just how bad things were. This wasn't just bad customer service, this was employees struggling to survive while management ignored them. And now he was going to do something about it. Philip sat stiffly in the break room, his mind racing. The quiet sobs of the young woman still echoed in his ears. If employees were being underpaid, that meant payroll manipulation. That wasn't just bad business, it was unethical, possibly illegal. He needed more information. Philip spent the rest of his shift carefully observing. The exhaustion in his co-workers' faces wasn't just from a long day, it was chronic. He noticed how often they checked the time, how they rushed through their tasks, and how little support they received from management. Doug barely acknowledged the workers unless he was giving orders. When employees asked about their hours or pay, he brushed them off with vague reassurances. Philip approached Jake near the register, pretending to fumble with the pricing gun. Has this place always been like this? Philip asked, keeping his voice casual. Jake exhaled sharply. Depends. If you mean run into the ground, then yeah, for a while now. Philip waited, hoping Jake would continue. Doug cuts corners wherever he can, Jake muttered. Schedules are a mess. If you ask for more hours, he says there's no budget. If you ask why your paycheck's short, he says it'll be fixed next time. Philip frowned. And corporate doesn't step in? Jake scoffed. You think they care? We're just numbers to them. Philip forced himself to stay neutral. No one's tried reporting him? Jake gave him a sharp look. You new here, so let me give you some advice. Don't ask too many questions. Doug doesn't like when people make trouble. Philip nodded, but inside his frustration burned hotter. Later that evening, when the store was quieter, Philip took a risk. He approached the red-haired woman from the break room. Her name tag read Lisa. He leaned against a shelf, pretending to adjust a display. I overheard earlier, he said. About the paycheck issue. Lisa tensed but didn't look at him. You should pretend you didn't. I don't get how that happens, Philip said. A company this size should have payroll systems in place. Lisa finally turned to him, her expression hard. Doug forgets to put in overtime. Sometimes he changes time cards. Says it's to balance hours. If you complain, your schedule gets cut next week. Philip felt his jaw tighten. That's stealing. Lisa gave a humorless laugh. Yeah, but what are we supposed to do? Rent's due no matter what. Philip forced himself to stay composed, but inside he was livid. This wasn't just incompetence, it was deliberate exploitation. Before he could say more, Doug's voice rang out from the front of the store. Lisa, quit standing around and get back to work. Lisa shot Philip a warning glance before walking away. Philip turned, watching Doug as he leaned against the counter, arms crossed, doing nothing. Philip had seen enough. The next day, he arrived early, slipping into the store before opening. He made his way to the back office, where Doug sat at the desk, sipping coffee. Philip knocked on the doorframe. Hey Doug, got a minute? Doug barely looked up. What do you want? Philip stepped inside, shutting the door. I want to talk about payroll. Doug's expression darkened. You got a problem with your paycheck already? Philip shook his head. Not mine. But I've been hearing things. Employees saying their hours are getting cut on paper even though they worked them. Doug's eyes narrowed. You ask too many questions for a new guy. Philip held his ground. I just want to understand how things work here. Doug leaned back in his chair, smirking. You want to understand how things work? Fine. Here's how it works. Corporate gives us a budget. If we go over, we get heat. So yeah, sometimes I adjust things to keep us in line. You don't like it? There's the door. Philip stared at him, barely containing his anger. Doug didn't even try to hide it. He thought he was untouchable. Philip took a slow breath. I'll keep that in mind. Then he turned and walked out. Tomorrow, everything would change. Philip didn't sleep much that night. His mind was too restless, replaying everything he had uncovered. Each piece of evidence stacked up like bricks in a wall. Doug's indifference, the manipulated paychecks, the exhausted employees. It wasn't just a bad store, it was a broken system, and Doug had made himself comfortable at the top of it. By morning, Philip had a plan. He would reveal himself today. But before that, he needed one last confirmation, proof that Doug's payroll manipulation wasn't a one-off mistake, but a deliberate pattern. He arrived at the store before opening, blending in as the other employees trickled in. Lisa was already there, unloading a shipment in the back. He found her stacking boxes, her movements efficient but weary. I need to ask you something, Philip said, keeping his voice low. Do you still have any of your old pay stubs? Lisa froze, then glanced over her shoulder. Why? I think Doug's been skimming from everyone, not just a few people. If you have proof, anything that doesn't match up, it could help. Lisa exhaled through her nose, considering. Then, after a moment, she pulled her phone from her pocket and scrolled through her messages. She turned the screen toward him. I took a photo of my schedule last month. See these shifts? She said, pointing. Now look at my direct deposit. Philip leaned in. The numbers didn't add up. She had worked more hours than what was reflected in her pay. It's not just me, Lisa added. A few of us started tracking after we noticed the pattern. Doug always has an excuse, system error. Forgot to clock you in, but it never gets fixed. Philip's stomach twisted. This was worse than he thought. Before he could respond, Doug's voice barked from the front. Lisa, shipment's not going to unload itself. Lisa quickly tucked her phone away and went back to stacking boxes. Philip straightened, exhaling slowly. He had enough. He stepped out into the sales floor, scanning the store. Employees moved with mechanical efficiency, helping customers, ringing up purchases, pretending everything was fine. Doug stood near the registers, arms crossed, overseeing it all like a king on his throne. Philip walked straight toward him. Doug barely spared him a glance. What do you want? Philip didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached up and pulled off the cheap name tag he had been given. Doug's brow furrowed. The hell are you doing? Philip met his eyes. I'm Philip Reynolds. Doug blinked. Who? Philip's patience had worn thin. The CEO of this company. The color drained from Doug's face. A few employees stopped what they were doing, eyes widening as they overheard. I've spent the last few days in this store, Philip continued, voice steady but firm. I've seen how you run it. I've heard what employees are going through. And I've seen exactly what kind of person you are. Doug opened his mouth, but Philip didn't let him speak. You've been manipulating payroll, Philip said. You've cut hours on paper while making employees work them. You've ignored complaints, threatened people who spoke up, and let the store fall apart under your leadership. Doug's expression twisted. Now hold on a minute. No, Philip cut him off. You hold on. I have proof. Employees have been tracking their hours. I've seen the discrepancies myself. Doug's jaw tightened. You don't understand how hard it is to manage a store like this. We have budgets. We have quotas. Sometimes you have to make tough calls. Philip's eyes darkened. A tough call isn't stealing from employees who can barely pay rent. Doug scoffed, but there was a nervous edge to it now. You've been here a few days. You don't know how things actually work. Philip stepped forward. I know enough to fire you. Effective immediately. A stunned silence fell over the store. Employees exchanged glances, barely daring to believe what they had just heard. Doug's face turned red. You can't just. I can, Philip said. And I will. For a moment, Doug looked like he wanted to fight it. But then, as the weight of the situation settled in, his shoulders sagged. Without another word, he turned and stormed toward the back office. Philip let out a slow breath, then turned to the employees who had gathered nearby. I'm not just here to fire Doug, he said. I'm here to fix this. Lisa stepped forward hesitantly. You actually mean that? Philip nodded. Starting today, payroll discrepancies will be corrected. Every employee will be reimbursed for stolen wages. And I want to hear directly from you about what else needs to change. A ripple of cautious hope spread through the group. Philip met their gazes. No one should have to beg for the paycheck they already earned. That ends now. For the first time since stepping into the store, Philip felt something shift. The weight of neglect, of fear, of exhaustion, it lifted, if only slightly. And this was only the beginning. Philip stood in the middle of the sales floor, the weight of his decision settling in. Doug had retreated to the back office, but the store wasn't going to fix itself just because its manager was gone. Employees lingered near the registers, some watching him with cautious optimism, others unsure if anything he said would actually lead to change. He needed to make sure they believed him. Philip turned to Lisa first. She had been one of the few willing to speak up, and that kind of bravery couldn't go unnoticed. You and I need to go through every payroll record. I want every missing hour accounted for, and I want employees paid back as soon as possible. Lisa's expression shifted from wary disbelief to something closer to determination. I can do that, she said. A few of us have been keeping records on our own, just in case. We'll compare them to the system. It didn't surprise him that employees had resorted to tracking their own hours. That level of distrust in management took time to build, which meant Doug's behavior had gone unchecked for far too long. Philip turned to the rest of the staff, scanning their faces. I also want to know what else has been going wrong here, not just payroll. Staffing, scheduling, customer complaints, inventory issues, whatever's been making it harder for you to do your jobs. A man near the register, someone Philip remembered shadowing earlier, hesitated before speaking. We're always short-staffed, he said. Doug kept saying we didn't have the hours to hire more people, but we're constantly drowning. Another employee, a younger woman organizing a display, added, and we don't get proper training anymore. New hires are thrown onto the floor without knowing what they're doing. Then they quit because it's too stressful. Philip nodded, absorbing each piece of information. That stops now, he said. We're going to fix the schedules, bring in more help if we need to, and make sure new employees actually get trained. No more cutting corners. A few skeptical glances passed between employees. He couldn't blame them. They had probably heard empty promises before. Jake, who had been the first to warn Philip about how things worked under Doug, crossed his arms. How do we know you'll actually follow through? Philip met his gaze. Because I built this company, he said. And I refuse to let it turn into the kind of place that chews people up and spits them out. Jake studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. All right, he said. Then let's see what you do. That was fair. Words meant nothing without action. Philip spent the rest of the day meeting with employees in small groups, gathering details on what had been neglected under Doug's leadership. The issues ran deeper than just payroll. The store's inventory system was a mess, customer service training had been deprioritized, and morale was at an all-time low. Employees weren't just overworked, they felt invisible. By the time the store closed for the night, Philip had a plan. First, he sent an urgent message to corporate, instructing them to pull payroll records for the store. Every missing hour would be accounted for, and employees would be reimbursed immediately. Next, he reached out to the district management team. Changes needed to be made across all stores. If this had happened under Doug, there was no telling how many other managers were quietly exploiting their power. After that, he met with Lisa and a few other employees who had been keeping records. Together, they cross-checked their notes with the store's system, and the discrepancies were worse than he had even expected. Some employees had lost hundreds of dollars in unpaid wages. Philip made sure every single person affected would get what they were owed. The following week, he returned to the store, this time as himself, not as a trainee, but as the CEO. Employees were still adjusting to the changes, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. The tension that had once hung over the store had started to lift. New hires were being brought in to fill the staffing gaps. Training programs were reinstated. And most importantly, employees no longer had to fight for their paychecks. Lisa approached him near the registers, arms crossed. I'll admit, she said, I didn't think you'd actually follow through. Philip gave a small nod. I don't blame you. But this company only works if the people running it are treated fairly. That's never going to be an issue again. Lisa studied him for a moment before offering a handshake. Good, she said. Because if it is, we'll be watching. Philip took her hand, shaking it firmly. That's exactly what I want. Philip arrived at the corporate office early that morning, his mind still processing everything that had unfolded at the store. While the immediate issues had been addressed, he knew that fixing one location wasn't enough. If Doug had been able to manipulate payroll for so long without consequence, there was a deeper problem in the company's oversight. He stepped into the conference room, where his senior leadership team was already waiting. The district managers, HR executives, and operations directors sat around the long wooden table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. News of Doug's firing had spread quickly, and they all knew this meeting wouldn't be business as usual. Philip took his seat at the head of the table, setting down a thick folder filled with payroll records, employee testimonies, and internal reports. Before anyone could speak, he opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. I want to know how this happened, he said, his voice measured but firm. How did a store manager get away with manipulating payroll for months without anyone catching it? The HR director, a middle-aged woman named Evelyn, adjusted her glasses. We review payroll inconsistencies quarterly, but if a manager alters time cards before submission, it's difficult to detect unless employees report it directly. Philip leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the table. Employees did report it. Multiple times. Doug told them it would be corrected, then never followed through. And when they pushed back, he cut their hours in retaliation. The district manager responsible for that location, a man named Greg, cleared his throat. Doug always kept his numbers within budget. His store met targets, so there weren't red flags from a financial perspective. Philip's gaze locked onto him. Because he was stealing wages to make the numbers look good. Greg hesitated, then nodded. I didn't realize how bad it was. Philip exhaled slowly. That's the problem. We've been relying on surface-level metrics instead of understanding what's actually happening on the ground. He turned to Evelyn. We need a system in place where employees can report payroll discrepancies directly to corporate, bypassing store management entirely. And I want every payroll adjustment flagged for independent review. No more blind trust. Evelyn took notes. We can implement that immediately. Philip shifted his attention to Greg. Store visits need to be more than just checking sales numbers. I want district managers talking to employees, not just store leadership. If someone had asked the staff directly, this would have come out a long time ago. Greg nodded. I'll restructure our review process. Philip let his gaze sweep over the room. This isn't just about one bad manager. It's about ensuring this never happens again. If an employee is scared to report mistreatment, we've already failed. The room was silent for a moment before Evelyn spoke again. What about the employees who were affected? Beyond back pay, is there anything else we're doing? Philip had already thought about that. I want every employee in that store to receive a retention bonus. They stayed through horrible conditions, and they deserve recognition for that. Greg frowned. That could set a precedent across all stores. Philip didn't hesitate. Good. If employees know they'll be taken care of when things go wrong, they'll be more willing to stay and report issues instead of quitting in frustration. The meeting continued for another hour with concrete actions put into place. By the time it ended, Philip felt a sense of certainty he hadn't experienced in a long time. Later that day, he returned to the store. The atmosphere was noticeably different. Employees moved with a renewed sense of energy, and for the first time, he saw genuine relief on their faces. Lisa was organizing a display near the entrance when she noticed him. She walked over, arms crossed. Did corporate actually listen? She asked. Philip nodded. Payroll reporting is being overhauled. Managers won't have unchecked control over time cards anymore. And you're all getting retention bonuses. Lisa blinked, clearly caught off guard. Bonuses? You shouldn't have had to fight for basic fairness, Philip said. But you did. This is the least we can do. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to respond. Then she nodded. That's unexpected, but fair. Philip glanced around the store. How are things feeling today? Lisa sighed, but there was a hint of a smile. Better. We're still adjusting, but it doesn't feel as hopeless anymore. Philip met her gaze. It won't ever be like that again. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good, because we'll hold you to that. Philip welcomed it. Change wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about making sure no one ever had to experience it again. And that was a promise he intended to keep.